John, you and your family have been involved in the retail real estate industry for a number of years. Originally, you focused on the mall sector. Now, with Bucksbaum Retail Properties, you are pursuing urban retail mixed-use projects instead of malls. What made you decide to go that route?
Well, maybe just stepping back a little bit, Todd. My father and my uncle, they started in the shopping center business in 1953. It was the first shopping center in the state of Iowa. And then in 1960, created the first department store anchored shopping center in Iowa. And I started to work for the company in 1978 and ultimately became the CEO in 1999 through 2008. And we had grown to over 200 malls and 200 million square feet of space. So, very ensconced in the mall industry. But starting in 2007, I started to recognize that, we were a mature industry and that if the retailers were going to continue to expand, most of that expansion or the best opportunities, in my mind, were in urban environments, in the cities. And the cities were having sort of a regeneration of popularity and people starting to move into them. And the retailers weren't well represented there. And so then following the recession in 2010, I left General Growth Properties, the mall company, and felt that I wanted to focus on ground-up mixed-use development with retail being the driver of the activity, and that this is where, in my mind, again, the best opportunities and retailers would be looking for new locations. And having come from a background of development activity, that I would focus on urban environments.
So, John, given your perspective, being in the traditional regional mall sector for a number of years and moving into more urban retailing settings now, how does the tenanting and design of urban and mixed-use retail differ from the malls that you did with General Growth?
I think all projects are challenging, but the malls, you generally had 100+ acres and big parking lots, and you could lay things out pretty much as you wanted to. The challenge that you are faced with in urban environments are the sites tend to be much, much smaller. If you are repurposing a building, it's generally not laid out in the manner that you would choose if you were starting with a clean canvas or a clean site. And then even when you are starting with clean sites, because they are so much smaller and there's a verticality that's usually associated with the project. The column locations can be much different. The parking is certainly different. All of these things, not only are they challenges for the developer, but the retailers, I don't want to say that they had become comfortable in the suburban regional mall environment, but they generally knew, if they took 3,000 square feet of space, where the columns would be, how the parking would be. All of these things are much different in the city environment. And that can prove to be very challenging, both to the retailer and the developer. So, there's a learning experience that on the retailer's behalf, because they want to make certain that they can do the type of productivity that they need to do out of a store in order for the store to be profitable, to afford the rent that they're being charged. And, they have a better sense of that in the mall environment. And so now, as I say, it's a new process for them in the urban environment, but, a great many of them are figuring this out.
So, John, as you just said, many of your current projects are in relatively urban locations. So from the real estate developer's perspective, are there other challenges with working in more urban retail?
So I mentioned some of the development challenges, in terms of store layout, how that can be affected by column placements and maybe, the verticality of things. Parking is no longer the 5 spaces per 1,000 square feet of leasable area, that kind of a thing. But also for the owner, developer, security, for instance, once the project is complete. That while security can be, and you're always concerned about it in a suburban environment, it can be even of greater concern in the urban environment. And so something that we have to think about and treat very carefully. The costs can be much higher associated with an urban environment, whether it's the real estate taxes, the common area expenses, of which security, is part of that. In a place like Chicago, where I'm very active, everything you do has to be, built using union labor and such. So the construction costs are much higher for me to do a project in the city of Chicago than I might be doing elsewhere. So, all of these things contribute to, what's already a hard business to, it keeps it hard.
Mixed use seems to be a rallying cry for retail development these days. In the past, mixed use was a dirty word. Why has that changed?
Mixed use today, again, I think especially in the urban environment, it's a combination of people moving back into the city, people, having maybe experienced a difficult housing situation during the recession, and there are a lot more people who are, inclined to rent today than necessarily own. So hence giving, forth to, all of the development of multifamily residential. I've always felt that residential and retail go hand in hand. And on these smaller sites that, we're developing in the city, some of it is economic. You need greater density on the sites. But with the demand for living space being as high as it is, incorporating the residential, primarily in my case for rent type buildings with our retail projects, it just seems like a natural combination. And so it's been working out very well. I think people, they like living in a vibrant environment, and, combining the retail and residential can bring that about. But then there's another example of a project that I have been part of, and it is a suburban project in North Cincinnati called Liberty Town Center. And Liberty Center opened this past October 2015. And while it's a suburban location, the project was built with a great many what I describe as urbanesque features to it. And included with the 800,000 square feet of retail space is a 175,000 square foot office, 225 apartments, and a 225 room hotel. And we find that the live, work, and play environment is just as popular in a suburban environment as it may be in the city. In the past, when we say, it was a dirty word, I think oftentimes the projects were built where the hotel, the office, the residential, the retail, it was all built at the same time, and generally the demand for all 4 facets, wasn't the same. So, you may have had a successful retail project, but you had an empty office and or hotel, which put great financial pressure on the project. I think today, again, in my case, where it's primarily just retail and residential, but having given the example in Cincinnati, where it does include all 4, it's just a careful analysis of what the market can support. We understand in Cincinnati, again, that, the office may lag a little bit behind the other 3, but I think we've just become smarter about, how we develop mixed use, and in many instances doing it on a smaller scale than back in the 80s, the mixed use projects that were done, very large scale, and if one piece wasn't working, that would be enough to, drag it down financially. so as to cause a failure, even though you may have had other pieces that were successful. But today, I think we can absorb better the different sectors of the industry that make up the mixed-use piece.